Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We have people logging in from all across the globe. Thank you so much for joining this session hosted by Bero. My name is Shakti Prasad. I am the head of content at Bero, and I run the Procurement Espresso magazine. I welcome you all to the 4th edition of Espresso Live event, an online thought leadership forum featuring procurement leaders and practitioners. Before I get started with the session, just a few housekeeping rules to be kept in mind. All the participants will be on listen-only mode for the entire duration of the webinar. We will take up the questions at the end of the presentation, but we would encourage our attendees to key in their questions anytime during the session. Please type them into the question box given in your control panel. There could be a lag of a few seconds in between the transition of slides, so please bear with us. If you have any difficulty in joining the webinar, please try to log back in or key in your queries in the Q&A box, and my team will try to help you. Now, I'm happy to introduce Michelle Baker, the CPO of Dutch telecom giant KPN, and Tiffany Sen, the CPO of the famous New York Metropolitan Museum of Art. I hope you all can see them on your screens. Both Michelle and Tiffany took an unusual route to reach the procurement function. Michelle has an undergraduate degree in dramatic arts. She later specialized in information technology. From drama to IT is quite a journey indeed. Since then, for the last 20 years or so, a strong IT background and digital understanding have been the backbone of her career progression. And she had worked with marquee brands such as SAB Miller and Rio Tinto. Michelle eventually switched over to procurement when a frustrated CPO insisted to a CIO that IT needed a purchasing team. For Tiffany, working at the Met is a perfect culmination of passion meeting profession. She has a degree in music and is an accomplished classical flutist with blues and jazz inclinations. Her husband is a musician as well. Together, they are the founding members of Inner Gypsy, a world-influenced blues rock band. Tiffany's career in purchasing began when she joined the fledgling procurement team at a major women's retailer. She learned hands-on about all aspects of procurement and was mentored by seasoned professionals. Overall, she spent nearly 2 decades at luxury retailers such as Ann Taylor and Louis Vuitton. Anyway, I am done with my somewhat lengthy introductions. Like all of you, I am also eager to know what these 2 seasoned professionals have to say on the topic women in procurement. Well, 80% of registrants for today's event are women and only 20% are men. It still shows it ain't easy to have across the aisle conversation on touchy topics such as diversity at workplace. And with that, let me start off with our first of the six discussion points. Next slide, please. Tiffany, Michelle, what do you think the function of procurement offers women in general?
Well, I don't necessarily subscribe to gender stereotypes. First, let me actually say it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Sakti. I'm pleased to be here with Michelle discussing this topic. I don't necessarily subscribe to gender stereotypes. I think that procurement is an amazing and exciting career choice for anyone. It's my belief that procurement hasn't fully really matured yet. It's still an up-and-coming function. It hasn't taken its rightful space within the C-suite to be fully recognized for the contribution that it makes to any company. So the function is up and coming. In procurement, you are exposed to any number of different projects throughout your organization. You work with people in all of the business units, so you're becoming very operationally savvy, and you're learning the business from the inside out. You are also in tune with market forces. You know where the indices lie, you know what's going on at the ports, you know the cost of a barrel of oil, so you have an interesting viewpoint and perspective about the world around you. And I think you're using your full potential, your full toolkit of skills and attributes. You are using both right and left brain. I say this to my team all the time. We need to be able to be analytical and reading financial spreadsheets and doing sophisticated analyses and talking about profit margins, but we're also being very persuasive and innovative and building relationships. So from that standpoint, I think you are in a position to have real impact to your company and impact to your community. And what's so interesting, I think, for women in this position is that we are pioneers. Women in procurement are on the cutting edge of a societal change, being part of a function that is still realizing its full maturity, and being the minority in that function means that you have the opportunity to really shape the direction that it goes, both for your company and for your community.
Yeah, and so to build on Tiffany's point, I completely concur with everything that Tiffany has said, in that I also don't subscribe to gender stereotypes. And I do think that the procurement function offers a world of opportunity to everyone because it sits across the value chain of any organization. So whatever your passion, whatever your interests, if you're interested in marketing, procurement has a role for you. If you're interested in HR, procurement has a role for you. And so although in many functional areas there are sort of gender stereotypical sort of densities of particular genders in particular functions, I think procurement sits across all of those functions in a way that no other function really does. So, you know, potentially engineering might have more, historically, not necessarily true today, but more men than women. HR functions and marketing functions often have more women than men. The point about a procurement function is that it does sit across the entire value chain. So it does offer that career opportunity within the function, that whatever floats your boat, as we say in English, is available within the procurement function. I think that, for me, is one of the things that I truly find exciting and invigorating about the function. And as Tiffany said, I do think we're on the cusp of a world of change and a world of opportunity within the function, to become a whole lot more strategic and a whole lot more engaged with how we see our supply base, how we see suppliers, how we see the supply chain, and investing in greater diversity in all of those elements will help organizations that we work for, no matter what our industry, to become a lot more diverse in thought. And I think it's the diversity in thought, no matter what your gender is, no matter what your cultural orientation is, no matter what your sexual orientation, that will make stronger organizations in the 21st century versus the 21st century.
Okay, thank you, Tiffany and Michelle. Next slide, please. Okay, can you recall examples of suppliers exhibiting a specific attitude during negotiations on account of your gender?
Tiffany, you want to go first?
Sure. You know, it's hard to know a person's motivation, but of course I have experienced what I interpreted as perhaps chauvinism or condescension. I have always tried to use that energy to my advantage, sort of like a martial arts move when someone is coming at you directly with a very strong and specific energy, to just kind of shift it. You know, so if someone disfavors the contribution of women, I think they won't be ready for a savvy negotiation point coming from a woman, or an innovative idea coming from a woman. It sort of throws them off guard and makes them uncomfortable. I did have an experience many years ago, probably 15 or so years ago in my career, where I was having a negotiation with the much older, very experienced male CEO of a packaging company. It was a very big multi-year deal. And I had done my homework, you know, the RFP was completed. I had my price points. I knew where I needed to be. And I was being very direct. And during a break in that negotiation, the CEO said to a male colleague of mine who was also in the room that he thought that I was being very aggressive and pushy. And what he didn't know was that that male colleague of mine was a very good friend and a mentor to me. and actually pushed back and stood up. He also was privy to all of the same information that I had and knew that what I was asking for was actually very reasonable. And he related this story to me afterward. It could have gone a very different way. And so that taught me a lot about reading the energy in the room. And I think that since that time, I've always been very sensitive to people's body language and feelings and the words that they use, that they consciously choose to use. And I try to shut that behavior down or to redirect it whenever I see it.
Yeah, I think on my side, I very seldom experience anything that I've felt as an attitudinal difference. So I suppose I've been very privileged in that if I have felt an attitudinal difference, it's typically been a positive one rather than a negative one in terms of the outcome that I was seeking from a particular negotiation. So sometimes, as Tiffany says, the particularly patriarchal or potentially sexist behaviors have always been opportunities to change the relationship and the dynamic within a negotiation for positive outcome for my organization, which is always something that I've been looking for. But I think one of the first times that I was ever really acutely aware of gender dynamics within negotiations was a fairly high stakes, multi-million, potentially billion-dollar set of negotiations with three of the largest consulting organizations who were to form a panel. And we ran a fairly intensive set of negotiations where if it was Monday, it was supplier A, if it was Tuesday, it was supplier B, and if it was Wednesday, it was supplier C. And we did that over a 4-week rotational period. So it was a very intense set of negotiations that were seeking to try and establish a framework agreement that was substantially similar between these three very different organizations. And for all but one of them, there was an entirely male negotiation team sitting on the other side of the table, and one of them had one female lawyer. But on our side of the table, for the first time in my entire life, because I'm a technology specialist, for the first time in my entire life, my legal support was female, my business counterpart was female, I was female, and my internal legal counsel was female. So there were four women sitting on this side of the table. And this is probably a little bit embarrassing and maybe oversharing, but one of the wonderful things about it is, one, we took all of the testosterone and energy out of the room in terms of, scoring points. But the best part about it is that we could go to the toilet and discuss the negotiation tactics afterwards. So I know that is oversharing, but that was the first time that I ever became aware of the dynamics between a male populated negotiation team and an entirely female negotiation team, because it was the first time in my life that I was in an entirely female negotiation team, and there were certainly differences. But that was a very positive experience, much like my attitudinal differences have been positive.
Oh, that's very interesting, Michelle. Next slide, please. Okay, in your experience, where have you seen imbalances in presenting your ideas to stakeholders by comparison, say, to your male colleagues?
Shall I jump in? Sure. Yeah. I think there are a lot of things going on here. I think that sometimes this is a lack of access to leaders. When most of the leaders in the company are men, and all the guys go to lunch together every day, or the guys go out for drinks after work, the guys are in the right place to hear more about what's going on, to form relationships, to have casual conversations, to strategize solutions, and to get more opportunities. So I think that, leaders must try to be more inclusive. And, even very small or seemingly innocuous behaviors that I have seen, like always asking the women to get the coffee when a meeting occurs, or asking the women to take the notes during the meeting, is really offensive and makes women want to check out. So, I couple that with the fact that as women, we have a much greater tendency to underestimate our abilities. Men generally do not have this, but women have, I know they've termed it as imposter syndrome, and even people like Michelle Obama have confessed to having this imposter syndrome. So, you know, to the women out there, I would say, don't doubt yourself. You know, we must all step up and take a seat at the table. Do not be on the sidelines, but expect to be recognized, to speak our truth and claim our space, to make sure that we are noticed, and to support other women. You know, I loved Michelle's example in the last question about being in that negotiation with, you know, a lot of other professional women beside her. And at the Met, we have a very large portion of women, and it's fun and it's exciting. You know, to the men, I would say, ask yourself what message you are sending to your female colleagues. Just, you know, reflect on your own behavior. And, you know, speaking of International Women's Day, this reminds me of many years ago on International Women's Day, I was working for a company that gave all of the females, all of the women in the company, a gift on International Women's Day. What a wonderful gesture, right? We all came in that morning to find on our desks a box, a nice little card, congratulations, you know, we celebrate you, International Women's Day, and a box filled with makeup. It had lipstick and rouge and mascara. And while I think the gesture was pure, the message was, you know, was really, I think, tone deaf. You know, to me, I'm seeing that my company values my appearance more than my contribution. So, you know, again, I don't think it was intentional, but to me it was appalling. And you know, I think we all need to ask ourselves what message we are sending to our female colleagues, and be ready to have courage and have the difficult conversations in confronting these types of behaviors.
Yeah, and I think to build on that, I think one of the things is we all have bias. It's inevitable that as human beings we don't have bias, and I think, you know, dealing with what your biases are is a really important part of doing exactly what Tiffany has just said. Is, you know, looking yourself in the mirror and saying, I come from a particular country and this is how they feel about gender politics. I come from a particular family and this is how my family dealt with gender politics. I personally believe the following, and this is what I think is true or not true about gender politics. And those are the beliefs that you bring to work every day. So I tend to agree with Tiff. Is, you know, you've really got to look, whether you're male or female, is what is it that you believe, and therefore what is it that you are projecting with your colleagues, be it positive or negative. And I think there's a real opportunity for us to say, well, is that fair? Is that the right kind of opportunity for society? And I think, you know, personally, I've had to overcome some of my own personal limitations. I grew up in a particular country. I grew up in a particular family. I had a particular mother and father who had a particular view about what girls were and what girls weren't. And I've had to grow up with that into a global working environment where sometimes I'm confronted with people whose views are not the same as my views. And I think if we are going to get to a more representative society and population of working colleagues, then we really do have to deal with the fact that the world is not homogenous. There are roughly 50% women and 50% men in the planet, but there is, you know, certainly things that prevent that from being true in the workspace. And part of what I think we can do is really reflect on where we've come from, what we need to change within ourselves, and then the impact that those changes can have in the wider context. So if we do believe that the workforce needs to be more representative, and I think for some of us we don't believe that. For some of us we don't believe that the workforce needs to be more representative, because otherwise we wouldn't have the gender imbalance that we currently have today. So I do think, you know, waking up in the morning and looking yourself in the mirror and saying, what is it that I believe is right and fair in the workplace, and then making sure that you work in an environment that reflects that is part of the change that you as an individual can make. And I think that starts at the top. So when we talk about presenting to our stakeholders, those are the kinds of challenges that we could and should be making to our senior leaders, our CEOs, our boards of management, our executive committees, to say, well, what do you feel? What do you as an individual truly believe is right and fair in your organization, beyond buzzwords, beyond lip service, beyond, jumping onto something that is currently quite popular as a corporate topic. I think the smallest unit of change is the individual, and to think that you personally can't have impact and you personally can't make change is to underestimate your opportunity as an individual to speak out, to behave differently, to examine your own conscience about what you believe is right, and then to challenge people who are not doing similar. And so for me, I've had very little negative experiences in terms of presenting my stakeholder ideas in the same way as a supplier question lands. But I do think that we, to really have impact, need to start acting more at the individual level than the corporate level, because that's where the change truly happens.
Couldn't agree more.
Thanks, Tiffany. Michelle, next slide, please. How being a CPO is different from a category manager, especially from a gender perspective?
Mm-hmm. Well, I only have the female gender perspective, so I can only speak to that. But I think there's an outdated paradigm that these higher level positions call for more masculine traits, logic and discipline and directness, more analytical thinking, being competitive and focused. So firstly, I would say these are skills, not traits. They're skills that anyone can learn and master, and that soft skills have just as much validity and need and use as the hard skills. But I find that I need to constantly confront old ways of thinking, and I'm continuously proving myself, proving the worth of the department, and challenging the status quo. Possibly because I have been at the forefront of a number of procurement transformations in the companies that I have worked for, redefining what procurement means to that organization. A big challenge for me has always been to get more attention and support for the function in general. It's very important to me that the CEO understands what the contribution of procurement is, and that procurement is an important driver of company performance. So there is quite a bit of managing upward. I would expect that this would be true for any head of procurement. But I think that good leadership really is not about retaining power or hoarding power. It is about empowering others and extending a hand. So the best thing that I can do as the leader of my team is to hire the most well-rounded, talented, experienced, smartest people in the procurement discipline, and then give them a voice, give them a platform. And that's going to make us be, as successful as we possibly can. And that's what I really strive to do.
Yeah, and I think on my side, I think Tiffany makes a good point in that I think gender and gender attributes are not necessarily the same thing. I think that masculine and feminine have specific attributes that are assigned to those two words that can be in the same individual, whether they are male or female. So I think it's really important for us not to conflate or confuse male and female with masculine and feminine. And I completely agree that I feel that the 20th century was very much a century of masculine attributes, systems thinking, logic, lack of emotion, etc. Those are masculine attributes typically ascribed to masculinity rather than femininity. But I increasingly see that more of my male colleagues want to embrace feminine attributes. And I had a wonderful post yesterday from an ex-colleague and a dear friend of mine who cheered me out on LinkedIn, and he said, I was somebody who taught him how to collaborate instead of competing. And that for me is exactly what I mean by masculinity and femininity, and that as a male absolute feminist champion, I mean, it was an International Women's Day salutation for me. But as an absolute happy male, he has seen the value of collaborative styles of working over the pure competition that he was taught on the sports field as a young lad. And so I think that gender is less about male and female and a lot more about masculine and feminine. And going back to our point earlier that says we sit across the value chain, given the diversity of personalities that we as a function have to deal with, it's really important that we learn to flex our styles up to masculine and down to feminine, or up to feminine, down to masculine, whichever way, whichever point you want to put us on the spectrum, because it's in that human nature that we start to become much more effective as practitioners in influencing and in challenging. And I personally subscribe to the notion that the 21st century is the century of collaboration. It is impossible for us to solve climate change, COVID, vaccinations, mass vaccination of populations. It's impossible for us to solve any of those problems without collaborating. I mean, I think the virus and how we've responded to the virus with the collaborative nature of science and the sharing of data, of the genome, and multiple organizations, commercial entities going out there and creating vaccinations that all of us are hopefully looking forward to receiving in the coming months, is truly how we need to be operating in the 21st century. The planetary problems that we've got, which extend into our supply base, which extend into our corporations, which extend into all of the things that we as corporations, be we new corporations, digital natives, or legacy corporations that are suffering under the consequences of COVID, all of that can be dealt with within the procurement function, and the skills to be able to do that mean that we increasingly need to diversify our own natural toolkit to be more masculine and more feminine, irrespective of our gender or our gender orientation.
That's a very interesting perspective, Michelle. Tiffany, thanks for that insightful answer. Next slide, please. Well, as you can see, we have some numbers here. We did some analysis, and it's quite clear that women are still underrepresented in the procurement function, especially at the leadership level. You could see C-level looks like it's 80-20. 79% are men and 21% are women. So, and it goes all the way down. VP level, it's the same. Maybe it looks slightly better at the manager level, but only at the non-manager level, there is some kind of parity, even though it's still not parity, but it's much better than what's that's compared to C level. So what are the causes, workplace as well as societal level causes that you think has led to this situation?
Well, let me first say that the numbers here are shocking. Perhaps there's a silver lining here that it's getting better and that it's better than it was. We don't live in the world that our mothers lived in or our grandmothers lived in, but it is not where we need it to be. So we have work to do. We have a lot of work to do. Women drop out of procurement and they drop out of the workforce in favor of other choices, better choices, when they are not heard, when they are not supported, when they are not recognized, when they are not given opportunities. So we must do everything we can to keep women in the workforce and to keep women in procurement. I think the good news is there are many ways to do this. And as Michelle alluded to earlier, this is about individual action leading to leadership action, corporate action, societal action. We need better benefit packages. We need better sponsorship and coaching and mentorship of women. We need more opportunities. We need flexible workplaces. And ultimately, we need diversity. We need an inclusive culture that embraces and celebrates the contribution of women in the workforce. Because I think that when women stay in the workforce, they rise to higher levels. When they have those opportunities to express themselves and to speak their truth and to manifest their contribution, it is a natural evolution that they will continue to rise to the higher levels of the organization.
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, I think as you rightly say, these numbers are shocking, and in our function, there's no excuse for it. Our function sits across the value chain of every industry and every possible function. There should be something there for every possible flavor of human being within procurement. So I think, unlike the bias in certain particular functions or sectors, procurement doesn't have that. So procurement really should be a whole lot more more representative of the gender balance in the wider population. And I agree, Tiffany. I think the whole idea that that we are welcome and included, and I think that this is the important thing. It's not good enough just to be diverse. So the hiring of X, Y, and Z is irrelevant unless you make people feel like they're a part of the team. And you know, historically, unlike my supplier attitudes or my stakeholder attitudes, what I have seen on more than one occasion in my very long career as a commercial operator is a sense of irritation when female workers get pregnant and want to take maternity leave. And I've worked in some amazing countries whose maternity leave is very generous, but those same countries' paternity leave is not as generous. And whilst as corporations you can potentially, from a purely commercial perspective, appreciate the frustration of a worker who takes time out, at the end of the day, only women can give birth. So, until we as society recognize that that's just a fact of life and create the space for women to both be mothers or be give birth, not necessarily be full-time carers, but create the space to have children and create the next generation of procurement practitioners, because of course that's what all women are busy doing, is creating the next generation of procurement practitioners. I think we do ourselves a grave disservice, and that is about support. That is about making sure that we support our colleagues, that we have the right sorts of checks and balances to ensure that men and women get a fair go at both being parents, if they happen to be in that set of circumstances, or women and women, or men and men. Raising the next generation is an incredibly important thing for all of us as the human race, and I think recognizing that within the corporate context is a hugely important element. And then I think role models is quite important as well. I think you've got to be able to see it to be it, and I think that the more recognition that there is to how we create voices and spaces for diverse voices to be heard, and I think all congratulations to Barreau for doing that in this particular instance. But I think the more that we see something, the more that we recognize something, then the more we can start to want to emulate what it is that we see. And I think that's also a really important aspect of why diversity really does matter, because it reflects the human race. And right now, the job levels that we're looking at right now don't reflect the human race. The power structures are not actually how the power dynamics of our civilization works.
Thank you, Michelle. And Tiffany, next slide, please. Yeah, so the way forward. Gender is one part of inclusion, but what steps can the procurement leadership, I mean, you both are CPOs, you're at the top of the function. So what can the procurement leadership take to make the procurement and the supplier base more diverse?
Well, there are so many reasons to champion diversity, not just because it is the fair and just thing to do, but because we get diversity of thought and innovation and creativity and a wider depth and breadth of contribution. I think we owe it to ourselves, we owe it to our companies, we owe it to society. I think companies owe it to society to be more inclusive. At the Met, our team is very diverse. I often say to my colleagues that I expect that the team and that the supplier base mirrors the diversity of the collection. So this is with intent. Our sourcing team is 50% male and female. We also have a very diverse team. We have many members of the team who were not born in America, who do not speak English as a first language. That is a very purposeful action. We worked with Mark Holyoke, who many of you probably know, who's a wonderful recruiter in the procurement space, to make sure that we were looking for the most diverse and well-rounded and talented and experienced people that we could find. And also at the Met, in the finance function, our CFO is a woman, our controller is a woman, our head of counsel's office, our senior attorney is a woman. They're very gifted and savvy and strong women. So to Michelle's earlier point, we have great role models. You know, so we are purposefully recruiting for diversity. And I think that shift toward diversity and inclusivity does not happen without intention and without action. And we really need to have purposeful programs, concrete goals, and, you know, consequences really if those goals are not met in an ideal situation. For supplier diversity, for me, the goal is not just to increase spend with our diverse suppliers. The point here is really to have actual impact, you know, to help grow these businesses, whether it's a woman-owned business or a small business or a business owned by a person of color, that we are helping them to grow and to contribute more to the community. It's positively impacting the company, it's positively impacting the community, it's positively impacting society, because when we have individual change and individual action, we are, you know, that spreads, that will continue to multiply, and we reach a tipping point. It's another reason why I think it's so incredible to be in the procurement space. At the end of the day, you're not just having the satisfaction of having negotiated a great deal or moved the project forward. You can actually impact your community and your society. And I think that we as leaders in procurement definitely need to have the intention and action to do that.
Yeah, look, again, Tiffany, we're completely on the same page. Nothing happens without the intention to make the change happen. I grew up in apartheid South Africa, and there was a phrase that I think we probably co-opted from, you know, the 1960s, which is, you have to be the change that you wish to see. And probably the biggest emblem of change in my lifetime in South Africa was Nelson Mandela. And he was one individual, and he changed the country. And he came out of jail, and he truly could have chosen a different path, but he chose inclusion. He chose a South Africa for all South Africans, not just for a particular color of South Africans, against what he had fought against. And so, you know, 27 years in hard labor in a prison for his beliefs, and he still came out and unified the country. And so I'm a great believer in the power of the individual and the power of intention. So Tiffany, I completely agree with you. We have to decide what we want to do. And I think as a function, it's very easy for us as practitioners, and I'm guessing that people on in this webinar are not necessarily all CPOs. What is it that you can do? What is your intention? What is your personal commitment to making the change and being the change that you wish to see? What is the change that you wish to see? Because until such time as you, this is probably a very high bar, but until such time as you start to behave like Nelson Mandela, to put aside your historical views of things and to embrace a future that is more optimistic, to embrace a future that is for example, in his case, a post-apartheid South Africa, we will never make those changes happen. Although Tiffany and myself are CPOs and there are things that we can do to influence it, ultimately, if you, people who work with us, people who work for us, people who are procurement practitioners in your own organizations aren't part of the change will never happen. So I think, you know, I think intention is incredibly important, but I don't think it's a top-down initiative. I think this is our problem. This is a human race problem, and I think collectively we can become more collaborative, more diverse, and every day starts with how you wake up and choose to do things differently from how you were taught to do it, how you believe you should do it, and perhaps how you believe you could do it differently in the future.
Thank you, Michelle, Tiffany, for your very honest answers to our discussion points. I think next slide, I think we are opening up for audience Q&A. Am I right? Next slide, please. Yeah. Okay, so we have received several questions from our audience. Please keep posting your questions. This is one question which I found to be very interesting and also very stereotypical. I was wondering, should I ask this question? But then I thought, okay, let me go ahead and ask this anyway. Are you being tagged as too emotional? what do you think, and how have you attacked that bias? This is from Metzli Alyosha Rodriguez.
Great question. I think that earlier in my career, I did get that feedback that I was too emotional. I think by nature, I am a very sensitive person. I find that I am in tune to people's energies. And I made a very conscious choice to start to really assess my own behavior, try to be honest with myself and learn about how I was coming across, but also to learn more about emotional intelligence and to make sure that I was bringing my best self forward every day. When I felt that I was getting very angry or upset, to have tools to be able to manage that, and to, you know, just to make sure that I was coming across in the way that I was intended.
Yeah, and on my side, I say, what is too emotional? That's, you know, I think a couple of things. One is I do have a drama, you know, in full disclosure, I do have a drama background. So for me, it's possible to act a range of emotions, which is very, very effective in a negotiation context. But I think Tiffany's absolutely right. You need to be able to understand what are your triggers and how do you get the best response from, you know, effectively most of us, well, all of us, irrespective of whether you're procurement practitioners or not, all of us spend a lot of our time negotiating, whether it's negotiating with our kids or negotiating with our partners. There's a lot of human interaction that says, how do we find agreement on whatever it is that we're discussing? And I think it's to get the best outcome from that agreement, it's really important that you understand your style and how you can flex your style. You have to remain authentic to yourself, but how can you flex your style up or down depending on what the emotional context requires? Sometimes we have to say sorry. Sometimes we have to disconnect from the spiral that we found ourselves in, you know, about unpacking the dishwasher or picking up the kids after school. I think it's really important to be sensitive to your preferences and sensitive also to the other party's preferences. And I think sometimes that calls for a lot of emotion. Sometimes it's really important to bring emotion into that, whether it's anger, happiness, sadness, for you to get a good outcome. So I don't think too much emotion is ever a problem. I think it's really important that you understand how you feel and how your emotions play out in a particular negotiation, whatever that negotiation happens to be.
Thank you, Tiffany and Michelle. Our next question is from Jan Bonnet on competition versus collaboration. How to cope with men that incite competition?
That's a good one. Do you want to jump in, Michelle? Is that, this is
yeah,
a sweet spot for you.
This isn't a relatively easy one for me. I am not a competitor. I'm really easy to do exactly that, you know, be like water, martial arts type thing. If you push hard enough in competition, all you have to do is step aside and the person is going to push themselves right out of the room. So competition, responding to competition has never been a problem for me, which is why I go back to that, you know, that comment that I got on LinkedIn yesterday from a very dear friend of mine saying I taught him how to collaborate instead of compete, because his personal instinct was to, when he first joined the organization, I'd been there previously to him participating. When he first joined the organization, he says quite honestly he wanted to compete with me, and I was we're not in the same game, so why would we compete? So I think, you know, the willingness to compete will necessarily always take you into a competition, and so you've always got to choose whether you wish to compete or don't wish to compete, and then you can potentially change the game for yourself and on your own terms.
Yeah, I really agree with that sentiment. I was fairly competitive in my youth. I grew up in a kind of a male-dominated family, and everyone was playing a lot of sports. And you know, I was one of the first young girls to play Little League baseball with the boys. And my mother was a strong feminist in the 70s and 80s, and she had a saying that she used to say to my sister and I all the time, which is, anything boys can do, girls can do better. And so, you know, take from that what you will. You know, it gave me a strong sense of self, and the fact that I am not less than my male counterpart. As I grew older, though, I realized that I didn't really like competing. I didn't like how it made me feel. You know, and that in the times when I started to get to collaborate with people, that was so much more rewarding and fulfilling. And so, you know, I have tried to learn from that and shift and make the conscious choice to go from competing with people to working with people and collaborating with people. And I have found that as a result of that, my interactions with people are much richer and, you know, more fulfilling, I think, for both of us, and that actually more gets done. I would suggest that you may find that by collaborating with your colleagues instead of competing with them, you know, that you will be more successful than someone who's just constantly trying to, you know, push themselves or push their own agenda forward. Because when you're talking with people in a collaborative way, it's not selfish and it's not all about your needs and your expectations. You take theirs into consideration as well. And so your colleagues are going to generally, I should think, be more receptive to that. They're going to, you know, want to work with you. So if you are more collaborative, I think it's going to serve you better in the long run.
Okay, thank you both once again. So there is a question on pay gap by two people, one by Brooke Douglas and the other one by Pamela Gerber. So let me read out the comment first by Brooke Douglas. It would be interesting to see the difference in salary between the sexes. In my previous world, the difference in salary is what did not aid in the retention of women. Also, the necessity of having the title to support the voice as a woman for the partner negotiation to be respected and heard as a woman. So this is more of a comment by Brooke Douglas, and there's a pointed question on the pay gap by Pamela Gerber. How do you propose to motivate more women in a career in procurement, and the career level and pay gap remains so disparate between the genders?
It's a really insightful comment and a tough question. I think that companies need to make sure that they are focused, working with their HR teams to pay attention to pay equity, and make sure that they are compensating people adequately for the work that they do, regardless of their gender. You know, there is still a lot of work to do here. Obviously, that equity is not there yet. And, you know, I think also that, you know, as women, I speak for myself, I have always felt as though I need to work as hard as I possibly can to get recognition for my team and for the contribution that we make. And many times I have found in my career that recognition and promotion does not come by itself. You need to be constantly active and making sure that people are aware of what you're doing, what your team is doing, the contribution that you're making. You know, I've always tried to lean forward and volunteer for opportunities, for projects, to meet more people, to get my name out there. That again, this comes with intention. And as with any point that you're trying to get across, when people hear something multiple times, when they hear about your name or your project or your team multiple times, and they start to rise up and take notice. You know, so, you know, at the moment, a lot of the work, I mean, for me in my career, a lot of the work that we try to do to further ourselves in the profession or further the department in the organization is purposeful work on our part. I look forward to a day when you know, this work is starting to manifest, and that recognition comes, you know, very organically. At the moment, I don't know that that's true.
Yeah, and I think a couple of builds on what Tiffany says. I completely agree. I think the same pay for the same work element is you know, a company attention point. That's something that, you know, if somebody's being paid 92% of the 100%, then that's a gap that needs addressing. And if somebody's being paid 150% of 100%, then that's also a gap that needs addressing. And so if that correlates with a gender gap, then that's obviously something that companies can and should pay attention to. That's a mathematical problem that over time can be addressed. I think there's the pay gap, but there's also the earnings gap. And I think what you see is a lot of women in their 30s have children and end up taking some sort of a career break, and so they get, they lose 6 or 7 years of experience that their male colleagues don't necessarily lose in the same period as a consequence of childbirth and child rearing, and that often leads to an earnings gap. And I think that also needs to be addressed. That's something that we should be examining, to say, because you've been out of the workforce raising the next generation of procurement practitioners, shouldn't necessarily count punitively against you for the rest of your life. How do we address, how do we accelerate, how do we get you back into the workforce as quickly as possible? So that I think needs attention. And then I think, what I do see gender stereotypically, and I do apologize in advance for saying that this is a stereotype, is I hear anecdotally a lot of women that I know personally, and myself included, is we will negotiate tooth and nail for our companies, but when it comes to negotiating for ourselves, we fail to ask. And so sometimes I do see that that we hang back and, as Tiffany says, wait to be recognized, but don't necessarily ask or demand something more. So often, and there is research on this, I can't quote it obviously, but there is research on this that suggests that the company will offer X, and most women will quite happily accept X, whereas most men will say, I want X plus. So I think there's those sorts of dynamics. Are we helping ourselves as much as we could when it comes to negotiation, and recognizing our own worth and our own value add and our own contribution? So I think, being very clear on your experience and what it is that you bring, and not underselling yourself. The underestimation seems to be more of a female, not feminine, but female tendency, and the overestimation seems to be more of a male tendency in salary negotiations. Harvard Business Review has done quite a lot of work on this.
Okay. Next question is from Joanne McFeely. How do you best approach the gender discussion without coming across or risk being perceived as entitled?
I guess that depends on what you mean or what you perceive by the gender discussion. I try, in fact, to approach situations based on as much data and fact and merit, that the situation, that I have, the information that I have relating to that situation. So, I don't necessarily think it's useful to overgeneralize or stereotype. I want to stay away from that kind of behavior. But if I am in a particular situation where I have data in front of me that shows that there's a man and a woman who are doing exactly the same job, and the man, excuse me, the man is earning, 25% more than the woman, I have data and facts that I can take and ask a question about, or push for a different resolution, or seek to remedy. So for me, I try to rely on data as much as possible.
Yeah, and I think most organizations are fairly rational entities. I have a line manager. I've had a line manager who said, all of us work for a commercial organization. Our job is either to make money or save money. That's it. Those are the two reasons why you should come to work every day. You're either making money or you're saving money. Tiffany, perhaps a little bit different in your organization, but that's kind of the raison d'etre of most commercial entities, not necessarily arts institutions. And I think, because of that, there's a certain logical way in which facts get disseminated. Of course, emotions never disappear completely, but I think that most organizations will, if you provide the right source of logic and logical arguments. So I think your ability to use logic to your effective deployment will help you in many instances if you talk about facts and talk about, but at the same time, I think this is an emotional issue. So I think recognizing the fact that people feel things about this is also helpful to how you will have a successful negotiation when it comes to discussing this with any of your colleagues.
Okay. So next question is from. Sorry.
I'm just going to one last thought on this. Ultimately, most of us in procurement have some negotiation experience, and whether it's the gender question or whether it's how much the supplier is going to charge us, ultimately that's a negotiation. And so thinking through your negotiation strategy, I would say, is probably the best thing that you can possibly do. Think about your negotiation plan. Think about your negotiation strategy. Think about the other party. Think about the other party's needs, wants, beliefs, desires, etc. And you'll probably win whatever argument it is when it comes to raising the gender question.
Okay. Thanks, Michelle, Tiffany. We are almost on the hour here. We are continuing to receive more questions. Would it be okay to answer one or two more questions?
Sure.
Oh, okay,
sure,
that's great. That's great. So the next question is from Stephanie Forbes. It's a combination of question and a comment. Do you think women are held to a different standard when there are issues or problems? Say for men, it's a learning experience, and for women, it is incompetence, when something goes wrong.
Yeah, I think it depends on who's holding the standard. I think there are certain individuals in the world and certain companies in the world and certain departments in the world that definitely have a gender bias or a race bias or a sort of sexual orientation bias. And I think that those different standards certainly exist. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this discussion. I think that depending on where you work and who you work for and how long you've been in the industry and also ageist bias, there is definitely a different attitude towards me with wrinkles versus somebody with no wrinkles. I'm not saying that that's good or bad, but there are very definitely, the human race is prejudiced. We like to think about the other rather than, we like to think about the us and them rather than the us. And so I definitely think that those things exist. I very much doubt those standards of behavior and expectations are in your imagination. I've experienced them, I've seen them, I've lived through them, I've coped with them. And what I think what we need to be doing and stimulating through collaboration and these sorts of discussions is that right? Do we think that that's an acceptable way for the human race to proceed in the 21st century when actually things like climate change or COVID really require collaboration, not the different standards in how we apply a ruler to one gender and a different ruler to another gender? I think we need to start to homogenize the rulers that we apply to all of our different societies in the best possible way that we can. And for many of us who work in global environments, that's even more important because we work with people from different backgrounds, with different beliefs, different orientations. It's really important that we increase our level of tolerance for otherness and welcome it with open arms in the way that the tourism industry does whenever we go on holiday. Used to go on holiday.
That's true, and very well said. I agree wholeheartedly with everything that Michelle expressed there. I think that is true. And I have experienced it as well in some instances, bias, prejudice, women being held to a different standard. I have always tried to work twice as hard as anyone else to sometimes to get noticed. I think also that it's important to think about the situation that you're in, because if you do work in a company that you feel does not give you a fair shake or does not value your contribution, there are a lot of other amazing companies out there that you can work for. And I have, in my career, had to make the difficult decision to leave a company and colleagues that I loved because I didn't feel like I was being heard. That my work really was achieving its full value. So I think too, you should be courageous and make a difficult choice sometime, because there are organizations out there that have fewer prejudices and biases and that will value your contribution and that will make sure that you are heard. And so follow your instinct and go where you fit.
Yeah, agreed.
Thanks, Tiffany. So next question is from Joel Tolliver. How have you managed to navigate the old boys club in your organizations?
Oh boy, that's a great question. That is a great question. That old boys club has manifested itself in many different ways at different points in my career and at different companies that I have worked for. Listen, I understand and I respect the fact that the guys want to hang out, but I also have tried to work with my colleagues, my teammates, and my boss to be more inclusive in that. It hasn't always worked out. I mean, honestly, I have been in situations where I was, one of the few female leaders with a bunch of guys with a male boss, and I did feel on the outside. Some of that, though, was physical proximity and distance. We were separated, working in different countries and different regions. So that is difficult, but not impossible to overcome. I think that the point here really is that you want to make sure that you have a good relationship with your colleagues and with your boss, and that inclusivity will come with the cultivation and development of intentional, mindful, meaningful relationships. I don't know, what do you think, Michelle?
Michelle, can you hear us? Looks like we lost Michelle there. Okay, fine. Let's move on to the final question of the day. We are continuing to receive questions, but unfortunately we have run out of time, but we'll take one final question. Tiffany, if you're online, what advice would you give your younger self or to someone early in their procurement career? This is from Nilofa Adam.
What a wonderful question and a great final question. I think I would tell my younger self not to stress out so much. Focus on collaboration, as we have talked about. Learn more about different backgrounds and approaches, and educate yourself as much as you can. Seek to be inclusive, and really make sure that you are developing your network, developing your relationships with people, and just continue to work hard and trust yourself and show up and speak your truth, and have faith and confidence that things will develop in the way that you want them to. I think I was laid off from a job that I loved after the 2008 financial crash, and it was devastating to me because I had been there over a decade and I didn't want to leave. But I realized in retrospect, it was the best thing that could have happened to me. I needed a kick in the seat. I needed to expand my horizons and work with different people from different in different industry and different cultures. It made me a better and more well-rounded person. So you will have ups and downs, you will have bumps, road bumps along the way, but trust that you're following your head and your heart. You'll go in the direction that you're meant to go.
Exactly, I lost connectivity there briefly, so I'll hand back to you.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Tiffany and Michelle. That was a great session on how to achieve diversity with the procurement function. Thanks for patiently answering our discussion points, also answering audience questions. We have received several more questions, but unfortunately we run out of time. We will try and reply by email to all the questions that were not answered in today's session. This marks the end of our session. A big thank you to all the participants for logging in today. And yes, several of you had asked whether we'll be sharing the webinar recording. Yes, we will be sharing the webinar recording with all our participants soon. Please do reach out to the email address on the screen if you have any additional questions. Thank you and have a great day. Bye-bye.